Welcome back to Corporate Fuckery, stories of survival, psychological warfare, and choosing what's best for you. I'm your host, Lauren DeGolia, and today we're pulling on a thread that looks glamorous on the outside, but has a very real cost once you're underneath it. Ambition. Not the curated, color-coded version, not the just push harder and you'll get there narrative. We're talking about the actual cost of ambition, financially, emotionally, psychologically, and what happens when the system rewards your drive and quietly extracts from it at the same time, which is exactly why I'm excited to talk to today's guest, Stefanie O'Connell. Stefanie is a nationally recognized personal finance expert, author, and speaker whose work has been featured in major outlets like the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and Forbes. She is also the author of The Broke and the Beautiful. I love that title, by the way. A book that challenged the traditional rules around money, lifestyle, and what it actually means to build wealth on your own terms. And through her platform, Too Ambitious, she's doing something that most people won't touch, breaking down the real economics of ambition, not the theory, the reality, the data, and the patterns that show us how ambition plays out differently depending on who you are, what you are navigating, and the systems you're operating inside of. Translation, she doesn't just have opinions, she has receipts. In this episode, we'll get into the trade-offs no one prepares you for, the systemic dynamics shaping how ambition actually plays out, and how to start to make decisions that don't just look successful, but actually hold up in real life. And she has a new book that she's going to share with us that's launching soon. I can't wait to get into that as well, because here's the new rule. Ambition without awareness is expensive. But ambition with strategy and a little truth-telling, that's where you get to take your power back. Stefanie, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get into it.
Wow, what an introduction. I'm going to have to copy that for myself, huh?
You're not the only one that says that on these sorts of things. How are you? Welcome.
Oh, I'm well. I can tell that you are a high performer already.
I don't know what you mean. Yes, thank you. I take that as both a compliment and someone who feels seen because the cost of said high performance
Mhm.
has run deep in my life in many ways.
Yeah, I get that.
But first, I want to start with something because your new book, The Ambition Penalty, is coming out in a hot second. If I have my date right, it's May 19th.
That's right.
And I want to know what your definition of ambition actually is.
So for me, I like to think of ambition as to be able to do the things you want to do in all of the expansiveness that embodies. I don't think of it as a job title or a balance in a bank account or a productivity hack or waking up at 4 a.m. or climbing up some ladder that might not even lead to where you want to go. Ambition, I think, is really being aligned with the things you want to do, and not just personally, but also in your experience of the pursuit of it, to be seen in the pursuit of it and to be valued in the pursuit of it. And when I talk about ambition penalties, often I'm talking about corporate environments, public power, positions of leadership. But what I'm saying when I talk about those things is that is not the only place where ambition manifests. Only to point out the extent to which ambition that is perceived and rewarded as high value is uniquely made difficult for women. And that's what a lot of this book is about uncovering.
I love that because I've been thinking a lot about why this is such an important topic, and it's really to talk about the system of corporate fuckery. And I hear you saying the same thing of this system of ambition wasn't actually defined for the level of success that you actually think it is. And that's where I think many, many people, and I was one of them not long ago, wake up one day and they're like, how the hell did I get here? What the hell am I doing? And how do I get myself out of this?
Yeah. I mean, the exhaustion, the disillusionment, these are the feelings that kept coming up when I was reporting. You mentioned I have a background in personal finance, and I was reporting a lot of stories of women who did all of the quote unquote right things. They leaned in, they asked for more, they stepped up, they followed all of the best practices. And not only were they not able to access the same rewards, but they were less likely to be supported. They were more likely to be undermined. They were more likely to be even penalized, attacked for doing so. And then they wind up feeling, unsurprisingly, exhausted, burnt out, feeling like they don't want to do anything anymore, and then internalizing it as though it's a personal problem instead of understanding that that is the outcome that the system is designed to do. Because if you can make it so punishing and so exhausting for women to access equitable sources of financial autonomy, economic rewards, personal power, political power, corporate power, then you keep the power as it is. And the system isn't challenged. And better off, if you get women to blame themselves for it, then there isn't a kind of collective outcry because everybody is sitting here thinking it's just them.
Yeah. I just heard a whole bunch of people listening to this episode exhale for a hot sec because they're like, damn, girl, you get it. So you get it. So I want to know what it is about your life that made you get it so hard. Because here's what I know about stories like this. There's a thing that goes down, probably feels like it's your unwinding, but you come out the other side and you're like, I'm going to fix this system. So tell us a little bit about how the ambition penalty, if that's what you want to refer to it as, got you to where you're at.
I always think about my childhood. I was born in the 1980s. So when I grew up, it was like peak 90s girl power. I was going to the take your daughter to work day. I was listening to the Spice Girls. I'll tell you what I want, what I really, really want, right? You know,
Please
I
do.
really bought into this myth that I was the next generation, and all I needed was to be instilled with enough confidence to go after the things I wanted, and I would get them. And I, of course, knew that was a promise that extended beyond myself. That was a promise for a generation. And I then went into the corporate world and my professional life after the recession. I graduated college in 2008. So that was its own little, mess of a time.
Fun times. Yeah.
And then after navigating the fallout of that, what did we go into? Peak corporate, feminist, lean-in, girl boss culture.
Yes, I'd like to thank Sheryl Sandberg for this exact moment. Could we get her on the show and be like, hey, girl, how are you going to help us out? Because you did a lot of damage here, sis.
And you know what I realized looking back on it now was the extent to which that vision of empowerment really sold us a story that a woman's greatest barrier to opportunity, to economic power, to basic safety and personal autonomy was herself. That was the message. The message was the problem is you, and you just need to stop being the problem. And that's bananas. Most of us today can sit here and recognize that that's a crazy thing when you phrase it in those terms. Like the fact that you're being systematically underpaid is your fault. That's essentially what it was saying, but it was dressed up in this language and this aesthetic of empowerment that we bought in. And I bought in too. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I didn't believe it. And I hustled and I took on 20 million side hustles because I believed the bootstraps narrative. And it's funny because it's like that kind of corporate feminist myth entwined with the myth of the American dream and pulling yourself up by your bootstraps.
Went there. Yes.
Yes. And what you realize is that, oh my gosh, all of these stories of what we have learned our whole lives to believe success looks like is really predicated on the same idea that you get what you deserve, and if you don't, that's your own fault. And I didn't realize how much I had drunk that Kool-Aid until I started aging into my career a little bit and seeing every single woman I knew outperform, outwork, outask, and not get the same results, not get the same promotions, not get the same support along the way. And then the older I got, the worse it got. And I couldn't believe it. I just kept thinking, there's no way. There's no way that we are sitting here 2 decades now. I'm turning 40 this summer after we started our careers. And gender pay gaps in the United States are the same as when we started now because
And
they've
in
been
some case
opening up.
worse if you're BIPOC. Yeah.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Exactly. And I spent a lot of time in the book talking about how these gaps open across different intersections of identity and the
Hmm.
unique ways they play out for people across identity. And of course, pay is just one metric, but it is an
Yes.
indicator of a broader ecosystem. An ecosystem in which, like, you can't even access, the ability to walk down the street with a basic right to your own body and
Hmm.
self and well-being. And I'm certainly, you and I are talking in 2026. We are seeing this on full display now. We have fewer reproductive rights than our mothers. And I really spend a lot of time reckoning with this disconnect between our outcomes and the promises and the stories we were all sold. And I think it
Yeah.
hit hardest for me when I had a baby. Of
Yes.
course, I'd been reporting these things for years, but then to become a mother and realize that, like, even for me, there was no amount of hustle, there was no amount of ambition that was going to save me from a motherhood penalty. And I lost about 90% of my revenue when I became a mom. Now, to be fair, like, I wasn't working in a corporate environment at that time.
Mm.
And I can sit here and tell you all of the other factors that were at play, right?
Hmm.
I could say the media landscape shifted. I started talking about things that are more political in a time where being political isn't really rewarded.
Yeah.
But I think that's an excuse. And I'm not going to sit here and say that me losing 90% of my revenue makes sense just because I had a kid. Sure, there may have been other forces at work, but I think that when we experience these kinds of inequities, especially around motherhood, there's a tendency to say you had a kid and so it makes sense. And I think that's insane.
It is insane. And I
Yes.
think what you're calling out here is really important because
Yeah.
corporate fuckery isn't about allowing the victimhood of the
Yeah.
system to drag you down, right?
Yeah.
That is actually the system working as designed.
Correct.
And I think what we're really trying to solve for, especially when it comes to ambition, is like, where is the neutral? Because women need to know like how to judge is the wrong word, but it's like how to check in with themselves on where is ambition neutral for me? Like, where am I making
Mm,
the money that makes me feel safe? Where am I having the hours at home that makes me feel like I'm not having to prioritize my job over my kids or my family? And it's like we need, maybe this is my external Capricorn talking, but give us all a checklist so that we can figure out like where is my ambition penalty? And maybe you have that built into the book. And I like that was the perfect segue. But where can they check in with what their ambition is costing them? Because that's the day they wake up and they're like, holy shit, I'm so done with this game. I'm beyond burnt out. I might have adrenal crisis. I might have just gotten divorced because I lost myself completely. I don't even recognize them. Like, we could go on and on. We could spend our whole 45 minutes here, Stephanie, like literally just talking about what are the ways that this shows up in life. And yet, for everyone, it's going to be so different.
yes, it very much is. And so, one of the ways that I talk about this in the book is really trying to understand this not through a framework of an individual perspective
Mhm.
or like me versus you or men versus women
Mhm.
or any kind of like battle of the sexes or any other forms
Yep.
of identity, but rather to understand that the unifying factor shaping these responses that differ across identity are really these perceptions of what power and leadership should look like, who is
Mhm.
entitled to express it, who is entitled to leisure, whose labor is going to be exploited to support the rewards and leisure of others, and a binary idea of what it means to be a good woman and a good mother and a good man in
And
this
a good
world
girl.
and a
Like,
good
really, it
girl.
comes from coming and becoming a good girl. And that's a lot
Yeah.
of the work I actually do with my clients is like, we're not trying to get rid of her, but
Yeah.
we are trying to say, like, hey, that is a part of you. Like, that good girl part is actually the ambitious part, I
Yeah.
believe. I would love your 2 cents on that too. But she gets you in a lot of trouble, actually, of what you're willing to sacrifice in the name of being a good. fill in the blank, person, girl, woman.
Well, yeah. I mean, especially as a parent and as a mother specifically, like to be a good mother in this culture is to be completely self-sacrificing
Yes.
and give to have motherhood as an identity subsume any other identity you have outside of it.
Mhm.
And that wasn't for me. That's the reason I didn't know if I was going to opt into having a kid, which is so sad because, like, I love being a parent. But I
Yeah.
actually don't like being a mother. And I think the reason I don't like it is not because I don't like being a parent, but because I hate the expectation of what that identity is
Mm.
supposed to look like and how you're supposed
Mhm.
to perform it. And the
Mhm.
way in which it's viewed as mutually exclusive
Mhm.
from professional identity or public identity beyond the service and labor you provide your child or your spouse. And
Yeah.
so, that's where the reckoning has certainly been most acute in my own experience. But
Mhm.
in my book, one of the things I try to do is document how these things play out statistically,
Mhm.
because oftentimes what will happen is, again, it's very easy to individualize your experience or internalize it as a personal problem. And again,
Yep.
this is this conditioning of being told that you are your greatest obstacle to whatever you want for years and years and years. And so no wonder when you don't get what you want, you think it's just you and you go inward. Instead, what I am trying to do is flip our focus outward and to have us contextualize what we are experiencing within the broader of experience of what is happening to all women as a social class or women
Yeah.
of color or LGBTQ women,
Mm.
or an understanding that it's these broader identity dynamics and the context in which we're operating that shifts the incentives and the rewards and then the penalties and the disincentives for the same behaviors, depending
Mhm.
on the identity of the person practicing those behaviors. And so when you have a system that when you put in the same inputs, but you get different outputs depending on identity, that's
Mhm.
what this book is really about exposing with data to say, oh, that's a system problem, not a person problem.
Yeah. And so give us some of your favorite data points without obviously giving the whole book away. But one of the questions I had for you was what is it that people really need to understand from a
Yeah.
data perspective on how they are navigating a system that isn't built for their humanity? And I love how
Ugh.
you said, I
Yeah.
didn't even know we were going to, and you're not the problem.
Yeah.
So help us connect some of the dots there on what data feels most impactful to be aware of.
Well, since we're talking about work that can feel really unsustainable, particularly, I just talked about parenthood. Let's talk about hustle culture. Let's talk about
Mhm.
hours worked as the metric, being held up as a metric of commitment and rewards or performance. That is a metric that is very, very inherently sexist. And one of the things that I argue in this book is the extent to which that metric is being held up because it reinforces inequality, even as it is inefficient for employers and hurts everyone across identity. And let me break this down. So there was a really fabulous paper that studied what happens when you have men and women completing a particular project and the way in which women were penalized for completing the same project with the same performance because they were more efficient. So even if it took men twice as long to get the job done, yes, you're raising your hand. There's probably a lot of people thinking this right now, right? It took the men twice as long to get the job done, and yet they were more likely to be rewarded because they were seen as more committed to the work,
Mhm.
even though being efficient, being able to maintain performance with less time is actually something that could theoretically be the thing that saves employers a lot of money and really helps optimize systems for better performance. And yet, by having this metric of hours worked becoming this trump card, what you effectively do is reward the people who, first of all, are underperformers, are inefficient.
Yep.
And second of all, really winds up excluding women because of the extent to which women are tasked with so much unpaid care work and community care work. So this is even true for non-mothers. Elder care in this country is overwhelmingly performed by daughters. Even teenagers, there are huge gaps in the amount of unpaid care work between 20-year-old boys and girls, in part because of these gendered expectations of who is expected to provide unpaid labor in this world. Now, I want to say another data point in this paper found that when women worked just as long as the men and longer,
This is going to be a good data point. I can just
it's a
feel
good
it.
one.
Uh-huh.
Not only were they not able to be rewarded to the same extent, but why they were unable to be rewarded is because they were perceived as being less competent and needing more time to get the job done. And so this is a really good example of the no-win situation. If you are more efficient, you're perceived as uncommitted. And if you work just as long or longer, you're perceived as not being competent enough to be efficient.
Mm.
And so effectively, there's no right way to win,
Right.
at least to the same extent as your male peers. But this doesn't manifest by saying we think women are not good performers, or we're not going to hire these people, or we're not going to promote them. Instead, what you get is this other metric in which you can hide a lot of these discriminatory responses, and you can wind up justifying the inequality that comes out to serve the system as you want it to stay put. And I want to bring up one other paper that I think really exemplifies this, where the researchers found, this is a 2023 paper, so this is recent data. I want to be clear, a lot of the citations in this book are very, very recent. So it's really an accounting of the way inequality plays out along modern metrics, right? And why I think that's important is because a lot of this stuff isn't explicit. People aren't going around and saying, well, we're not hiring this person because they're a woman or because they're a person of color.
Right.
Instead, the way this
you have to
bias,
find something else. Mhm.
yes,
Yeah.
the way the bias winds up operating is other identity characteristics got weaponized against women
Mhm.
through double standards that were not applied to their male peers. So if you had a young woman, she was disqualified from leadership for being too young. If she was an older woman, she was disqualified for being too old. Meanwhile, for men, age was framed overwhelmingly as an asset. If it's a young man, it's fresh, new thinking. That's
Right.
the kind of next generation of leadership we need.
Yes.
If it's an older gentleman, it's seasoned expertise,
Right.
bringing his experience. And so when you understand that the incentive is really not about performance, it's not about meritocracy, it's about finding ways to justify the same old inequality, and the extent to which you can do that when you couch it in all of these other ways, then you understand how inequality really reproduces itself even as women become more educated and ambitious than ever. And to be clear, in this paper, they identified 30 different aspects of identity that operated in this way, from race to parental status to physical attractiveness.
That's insane. We all feel it. We all know that it's
Yes.
there, right? And I know I experienced it multiple times at Nordstrom. And I even think sexual harassment in the workplace, which is
Yes.
primarily dominated by men. I'm not going to say it's 100%, but it's damn close.
Yeah.
It is a model by which we accept that as a norm,
Yes.
but it is actually a huge disadvantage and a way that we remove an ambitious woman's confidence, reliability, performance. I have another person that I've been reaching out to get on the show this season because I did not, in the moment where I blew up my career in 2019, I did not know that sexual harassment was the thing that was going to take out my career trajectory going forward. And if you had told 2019 Lauren that, who was filled with shame and how did I let this happen and all the other stories that were going on, I know she would have stood up and been like, fuck that. I'm going to go kick some more ass because I'm not accepting that. I'm not going to lay down and take that. But it's true. But knowing that's a primarily male dominated activity, for lack of a better reference in the moment, what the fuck, Stephanie?
It's an incredibly effective tool for maintaining women's exclusion. And you need to rely on those tools because women are more educated than their male peers. They are performing at higher and higher levels. And
Mhm.
so the only way you can keep them down is to create these more artificial barriers and enforce them with exclusion and harassment and all these other things. I talk about harassment in the book and the extent to which it's an incredibly effective gatekeeping tool. That's why, it's so disingenuous when people say things like, well, women just aren't interested in high paying careers or male dominated work
Mhm.
environments, right? A lot of
Mhm.
the book is about myth busting and taking these talking points that we
Mhm.
hear over and over and over again to justify why these chronic inequities, quote unquote, make sense and really just completely dismantles them. And I think the male dominated workplace culture is such an important piece of this book. I spoke to women who work in tech, who work in the military, different kinds of male dominated environments. And yet there is a very similar dynamic happening at play where
Mhm.
harassment is a gatekeeping tool to keep women either out of the industry altogether or to lock them into lower levels or to silence them and keep them in positions of service so that their labor is then used to uphold the power of male leaders who get ahead at their
Yeah.
expense. There were women who had been harassed by men and then
Mhm.
felt like they had to continue working for those men because they were told if they reported them, then it wasn't their fault if they got a bad performance review. And it's just like, this is not uncommon. This is everywhere. And it winds up creating the exact same hierarchies generation after generation, even when, you do all those right things.
Yeah, and so what I realized maybe mid-career was the reason we had so many tiger women in the
Mm.
generation before us was because they literally clawed their way up the corporate ladder. And that's why they acted so masculine, so competitive, so hardened. And I get it. And part of their job is, and I think some of them did. I know it's real easy on this show to overgeneralize everything, and that is definitely never my intent. But I saw them in a different way of,
Mm.
oh, like I get why you had to wear the male suit. Like I had Carol Merco on earlier this season, and I had to wear a male suit in the late 80s to be taken seriously as someone on Wall Street.
I believe it. I mean, women who work in construction jobs and
Hmm.
physical labor, their PPE, personal protective
Hmm.
equipment, is still designed for the male body. And
Mm,
that's not only an issue of conforming to the ideal of, who this job is for, that's a safety issue.
that
And
is a
that
safety issue.
inhibits your performance. And
Yes.
so this is operating at the extent of a daily interaction. I think people often perceive discrimination as like happening in a moment in time
Mhm,
or in this, and there are those moments, right? You talk about
mhm,
being harassed and there are these moments where you decide to blow it up. But it's
mhm,
also something that's happening on a daily basis, day in
mhm,
and day out. And the
mhm,
way gaps wind up getting so big is because they compound on each other. So you
mhm,
have the initial, at the entry level, you'll see a lot, much more parity in terms of representation across all
mhm.
forms of identity. And then immediately after that, it all goes the way it's always gone.
Yep.
And a lot of that is just because there hasn't been a reckoning with the fact, with the extent to which, like, a small amount of bias enacted on a daily basis compounds into huge gaps over time. And there was a really great paper I talk about in the book
Mm.
that quantifies this, and just pulling it up here. It says, by undervaluing a woman's performance by just 3%, a woman who starts at the entry level would need 17 performance review cycles to get to the executive level, while her male counterpart with the same performance, starting at the same level, same time, would only need 8 performance review cycles to get to the same level.
So I'm gonna
And
just rough math it. That's 110% more performance reviews to get to the executive level.
I mean, yeah, and in terms of successful projects they quantify, they say
Uh-huh.
she needs 208 successful projects completed, he needs less than half. of that.
My eyeballs are falling out of my head for those of you listening in because I'm just like, that is why I just look back and I'm truly not trying to make this about anything about me, but I know that there's women listening here who have gotten to a certain point in their career and they're like, no, I'm ready for that director level. I'm ready for that senior director level. I'm ready for that VP. And that was me at Nordstrom. And I had this SVP that I was reporting to. Guess what the words were? I already know you're going to know what this is, but it's like, I'm ready. I'm ready. Put me in, coach. What did he tell me, Stefanie? Because you're going to deliver.
Oh, I mean, there's so many things he could have told
Mm-hmm.
you. He could have said you're not a team player, be
Mm-hmm.
grateful, you're not the right fit, there's a likability issue, you're too ambitious. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, this is the
Your
stuff I hear all the
leadership,
time.
everybody gets to be a leader at whatever or level of the organization. That's something like
Oh, now
you
he's
can be
really
a leader
placating
at the
you.
at the level of organization that you're in. So let's
Yeah,
just but this is why we get to a certain point in our career and
yeah,
we're like, what the fuck just happened? Like, why is Bob, who didn't do shit and
yeah.
doesn't know how to communicate and runs on all the politics? But again, like this system is designed for the politics. And I actually think women bring a level of care. Part of the ambition is not only we bring the brains, but we bring the level of care and attention that holds us back in a way. And I mean that with loving, like total love and
Hmm.
admiration. It's that feminine energy of, no, we want people to succeed. We want people to feel seen. And that is essentially, in some scenarios, what costs us that upward momentum and keeps us managing all the same level.
Well, and that's something that, again, I think is a failure of the workplace. You know,
Hmm.
if the workplace was really operating in the way it should, that's what should be rewarded
Yeah.
because that's improving morale, that's improving culture. There's a great paper, I think it was called Work as a Masculinity Contest, and it wound up,
Mm.
is a great title, but it just wound up really showing how this hyper competitive culture that rewards competition that isn't actually productive winds up not just giving an outsized amount of power to a certain kind of white dude, but it also incentivizes really, really bad behaviors that hurt the whole company. And I
Mhm.
feel like we're seeing this play out in the headlines every single day in
Mhm.
terms of just watching
AI
these
layoffs are
leaders.
number 1. Like,
Oh my
number
gosh,
1,
yeah.
it's disgusting, and that's, most of my highly hit social media content is how I talk about how I think that this is inhumane. Like, they're making it about
Yes.
AI, and it absolutely is not about AI, and they are setting the tone for every other organization out there to reset the bar on the workforce, and this is wrong. We need people to actually do something about this.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's just like the manifestation of all of these dynamics that I think have been there and have
Mm.
been building,
Mhm.
and over time there was a little more lip service being paid to the idea that work should work for people and
Mhm.
work should support a life outside of it. But all along, so much of what made work work was exploiting other people
Yeah.
and treating people inhumanely.
Yeah.
And I think the self-blame that we have experienced as people for whom it hasn't worked has also kept us from calling that out in a more effective way. A
Yeah, I
lot of
agree.
this book is really
Mhm.
about understanding that the way things change has been always historically not an
Mhm.
individual project. It has
Mhm.
always been a collective project. But the
Mhm.
way we have been taught to think about empowerment for the last 30 years has been as this individual project about unlocking something within us and only within us. It's not to say there's no self work to be done, there's always self work to be done,
Yeah.
but you have to bring it out into the community level. Like, women didn't get access to credit and mortgages in their own bank accounts because, like, they were being confident and they weren't doing it. And it wasn't just that guys woke up one day and said, let's let them have this. No, it was a huge effort of organizing in community, the whole civil rights
Mhm.
movement, the whole women's
Mhm.
movement. Like, those are the last times we saw real collective community change. at scale. And I think there is a lesson that we need to reclaim from that history because I think basically from the 90s onward, we just got sold this kind of like self optimization version of empowerment while all the systems of power just work to exclude us and exploit us more and more and more.
I could not agree with you more. And I even think of songs and lyrics, and you
Yes.
brought up the Spice Girls, but it's like movies and
Yeah.
society in general, media that is casting this vision of us. And I fully agree with you on we need to come together. There needs to be a community. And that is one of the reasons I'm like, we got to talk about all these things. And if anyone listening takes something away of like, how can I influence my organization to be a change leader in this?
Yeah.
Someone wins. It's almost like when the bell rings, the angel gets his wings. It's the same thing. It's like you walk away and you're like, I'm going to take the action that I can take in the influence that I have to change the system because that's what's best for all of us. But what I want to talk about, because if 2019 Lauren was sitting right here, she was like, what do you mean, Stephanie? What do you mean my ambition costs me so much? Because
Mm.
what I can't really let go of in my own, and I've been reckoning this for myself, just being a business owner and a thought leader in this own space, is I was going to work making decent money because I wanted to create a sense of safety for myself.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in a very financially unsafe household and I was willing to do anything I needed to do. My ambition was, and my therapist would tell you the same thing. Lauren was seduced by success because of the safety she thought it was going to bring her. So when we talk about the ambition penalty, it's you wouldn't have convinced 2019 Lauren. Like you have
Yeah.
2026 Lauren sold. She's, yeah, girl, let's go. Let's round everybody up and have a big conversation. But what I'm saying is I believe there's a level of trauma here and
Yeah.
maybe little t that is feeding that ambitious side that does require some of the self-work and the self-awareness and the self-reflection that actually is going to help change the broader narrative.
Yeah. I talked about how so much of this work was really inspired by these individualistic girl boss, girl power promises, but the book
Mhm.
actually ends with a whole chapter on what we're seeing now in terms of the discourse around trad wives and a real rejection, like
Uh-huh.
this reframing that completely giving up your financial power, letting go of your ambition altogether, being the solution, being the idea that that's going to unlock your freedom and autonomy and your access to rest. And what I argue in the book is that that ideology suffers from the same fatal flaw as the
Yep.
ideology of the girl boss. They are both individualistic ideologies. The recipe they give for self optimization is different, but they both rest on the same promise, right? The girl boss says, put on the right power suit and use the right exclamation points or don't, and then you'll get everything you ever wanted. The trad wife is saying, put on the right sundress and submit to your husband, and then you'll get all you ever wanted. But what none of those things do is confront the fact that you're still going to be you can't like out Pilates or like out sourdough bake your bread to like universal basic income, right?
Yeah.
Or healthcare or a basic social safety net. And the way you get those things is just not on an individual basis. And so when I talk about ambition penalties, it's not that I'm saying that women should disavow their ambitions. I actually think it's important for women to have their ambitions. I actually think women's financial autonomy is very, very important. It's very, very critical. But what I am saying is that we have to be reckoning with the fact that when your ambition is not equitably rewarded or supported, you are always going to eventually get caught up in some of this fallout.
Yeah.
And it's not that I think that you can outhack your way of avoiding this fallout altogether.
Yeah.
That would also be a very individualistic framework for thinking about it. There's no cheat code for
There isn't.
opting out of this system. But what I will say is when you build community and when you work collectively, you build meaningful resilience. And resilience is one of the things I think we're really lacking in terms of not like the individual level, but collective level. I'm not worried so much about self-care. I'm worried about community care.
Yeah.
I'm worried about like when it all goes to shit, you have somebody there who can take care of you. And it's not all your eggs in one basket like a spouse, right? It is a diverse network of sources of meaning in your life,
Yeah.
support in your life, financial resources, social resources, personal resources,
Yeah.
because these consequences are going to hit you, whether it's the consequences of the backlash we've been talking about or the consequences of just living in the world as disruptive as it is right now. If you are only optimizing for your own self, like you are missing out. You are missing out on not just the community needed to reshape the systems in and of themselves, but the community needed to withstand the systems as they currently exist.
I could not agree with you more. And I would say community in some capacity feels challenging following COVID and the
Yes.
competitive nature of the corporate system as a whole. So that takes a whole lot of intentionality, a whole lot of reaching across the hall, a whole lot of like 80s and 90s and early 2000s. Hey, we all know each other. We're all a team. Like we're all
Yeah.
that's how it used to be. I think I am starting to feel a little older because I'm like, wow, I see how my parents used to feel about how the system changes and you're like, what the hell happened? But it's like we do need some of that and we need the next generations of the workforce to understand how this works because they're not getting that message right now. And the
No.
younger and younger that they come into the workforce and without some of these skills and these models and these mentors, like they're going to miss that whole narrative. And then it's even going to be more dog eat dog than it is today. And ambition is going to cost way more than it does today.
Yeah, yeah. Right now, we're being increasingly isolated. Certainly, the
Hmm.
pandemic accelerated
Hmm.
that. But the phones, even the way self care is often framed, the way it's performed rather online, is
Perform.
often
Yes.
framed as this very individual pursuit. It's a woman
Hmm.
alone in the woods. And I'm not saying like I don't recharge sometimes by being alone and I don't like being in nature. Like, those are things that are valuable. But that's not the thing that's going to build our resilience through this. You know, you
Hmm.
build in community, you build by diversifying sources of
Hmm.
support, having broadly shared networks. And I also think it's important because it gets people into a practice of
Yep.
thinking beyond individualism.
Yep.
That's a skill that I think we've lost is working collectively, building community, and I think it's one of the most valuable skills we have in being truly empowered, which for
Hmm.
me, that means challenging systems of power. It's not about how I personally feel. It's
Yeah.
about, am I able to better challenge the status quo and remake it in my own personal way? And I even talk about this in the book in terms of the home, in the simplest way. I talk about when we say things are systemic, people often feel disempowered. They feel
Mhm.
like, well, if it's the system, if it's not me, what can I do about it? And so one
Yes.
of the things I break down is like, you know, try to understand that you're interacting with systems every single day and they're
Mhm.
operating at many levels. So they're
Mhm.
operating at the interpersonal, they're operating at the institutional, they're operating at the political and cultural. And you, in an interpersonal level, I think about this as a mother, as a parent. I am challenging what the system of heterosexual motherhood and marriage demands of me every single day.
Mhm.
And that's something that I know makes a difference because I wrote a
Mhm.
whole chapter how
Mhm.
women's labor effectively subsidizes men's wealth and earnings in heterosexual marriage still today in 2026. And so I think like the way in which you're able to push back even at the interpersonal level is when you know you got people behind you and can support you, because I interviewed women that would try to set a boundary to redistribute childcare in their household, for example, and their husbands would pout, or they would all of a sudden like sabotage women right before they went on a business trip or to a networking event and would
Mhm.
call them incessantly. But
Mhm.
instead, if those women have built their communities and they have other people that they can call on, well, then they can enforce those boundaries much more materially
Yeah.
because you have a backup and you have a backup to the backup. And I think that's what you lose. That's the kind of
Yeah.
resilience you lose when you haven't built community.
I fully agree with you, and I think that even goes down to I have a client who is a CMO, and I can't even get a healthy dinner on the table, and I'm like, "Well, maybe I'll start a business where, like, moms who work from home or work in the home, like they could cook the meal for the mom out of the home so that
Yeah,
everybody, like that
that's a
is the,
great example. That's a
yeah,
great,
that's the
like
kind of
resource
support.
sharing,
Mm-hmm.
time, like
Mm-hmm.
and that is radical. I know it might not feel that way to people, but that allows people to reclaim their time, their
Mm-hmm.
leisure, their space, like their time with their children.
Yeah.
That's really radical in an environment that's really seeking to extract all of that joy and space
Yeah.
and labor out of you.
What I love about that model is like both moms win. Like the
Yes.
mom staying at home, wanting to earn extra income without sacrificing time with her kids. Like she gets to make some money and still put a good meal on her table. And she also
Yes.
gets, so I actually think it could be a thing. Like we need to get this started. Send me an email if you're listening and you want to get this started. Stefanie, I absolutely love talking to you. I know we're just about out of time, but if we were to rewrite the rule of ambition for women today, knowing that community is the North Star of resourcing yourself, evaluating your values, looking at your time, how would you, for the woman listening, would you impart with her on her today that would be like, hey, this is the rule you get to carry forward with you from this moment forward?
Yeah. So I would say that for every single thing that you want to do and achieve and go after, know that there are barriers along the way. And it doesn't mean that you should not pursue those things you still want to do, but it's important to have an awareness of the headwinds you're going to face
Mhm.
and not be blindsided by the backlash you face along the way, because that's what gets people stuck in a cycle of self blame and
Yeah.
internalizing systemic failures as personal problems.
Mhm.
And I would say that for every goal you have and all the things that you have on the to-do list to achieve it,
Mhm.
incorporate a community element, right?
Yeah.
So there is often everything I need to do to research what I got to research and rehearse what I got to rehearse and practice all my talking points and data gathering. But I think we will all be better served about thinking about what's the way I can work collectively toward achieving
Mhm.
this goal as well. So, one of the examples I give in the book is like when you're asking for a raise, being able to access more equitable income is something that you can take on as a personal project as well as a community project. So,
Sure.
whether that's even just having your own information sharing network that you share with other people what you've been paid for things, you
Mhm.
develop resource sharing, you tap into institutional knowledge about who are the champions in the organization, who are not. You talk about some of the insider baseball of it all
Ah,
that really helps you leverage not only for yourself, but on behalf of everybody working in that organization. Or if the organization has a pay transparency policy, for example, making sure that's being enforced collectively, thinking
mhm.
about how you get those policies passed in the first place or advocating for those
Mhm.
policies. So, thinking a little bit more creatively about getting the things we want so that we're not just thinking about how we get them, but how do we make this more accessible to everyone and understanding that that's the tide that lifts all boats.
That is the perfect way to end this episode. Thank you so much. The Ambition Penalty is out on May 19th. I will definitely be pre-ordering my copy. I'll drop the link down in the show notes below. Stefanie, it was lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for everything that you're doing to shape this movement. I am definitely inspired by not only the work that you've done, the data you've gathered, the conversations that you've had. It's just so needed. Appreciate you.
Thank you for having me and letting me have this conversation with you and your audience. It's a pleasure.
For sure. If this episode did anything, it probably named something that you've felt for a long time but couldn't quite articulate. That ambition you've been carrying, it's not just drive. It's been shaped by a system that rewards you and then quietly takes from you at the same time. And what Stefanie laid out so clearly is this: you're not behind and you haven't been doing it wrong. You've been playing a game where the rules were never designed to be fair in the first place. So the move isn't to abandon your ambition. It's to get radically aware of what it's costing you and decide on your terms what's actually worth it. If you want to go deeper into the data, the patterns, and the reality behind all of this, please go grab Stefanie's book, The Ambition Penalty. It's sharp, it's backed, and it will absolutely change how you see your career, your money, and the system you're operating inside of. And if you're listening to this thinking, Okay, but what does my ambition look like now? Where am I overpaying for a version of success that doesn't even fit anymore? That's the work I do. I help you unpack the patterns, the pressure, and the identity that you've built around success so you can redefine it in a way that actually feels like power, not performance. So, if you're ready to see ambition differently and move differently because of it, there's a link in the show notes to work with me. Because here's the truth that no one says out loud: ambition isn't the problem. Unexamined ambition, however, that's where the costs add up. And we're not doing that anymore. Thank you for being here today. I am your host, Lauren DeGolia, and I will see you next time.